for stopping by and visiting with us today. We're actually here for the Inclusive Hiring Practices Report Out that the SENDAS project worked on with Human Resources and the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion partnership that we have. We'll just call it a little collaboration. Just a few things. This meeting is being recorded, so anybody after the event can reference back to it, or you can pass it along to other people you don't see here and would like them to have the information. We also have a question and answer session that's going to be at the end of our presentation. So if you could please hold your questions and comments until then, we'll really appreciate that. And I'm going to turn it over for a welcome for today from our very own college president, Dr. Robinson.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Melissa. I really do appreciate it. I appreciate being here in person. I didn't think I was going to be able to do that, so it's always nice when we can share space. I also want to thank all of you for this great work. It is so important that we do this work. We can't just talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. We really do have to practice it. And it is something that doesn't live with one person or one type of person or one body. It lives within our campus. It's important that students see that our campus reflects them. And it's a long-standing project. It's something that we have to continuously do. It's not going to end. We're going to do this for 2 years and it's going to be over. It took a long time to get here to these inequities. It's going to take a long time to undo them. So again, I'm committed to this work as part of our strategic plan. It's goal number one. Am I correct? Am I correct? Is it goal number one? It's goal number one. So let's act like that. Let's act like that's what it is. If that's what it is, then it is goal number one. So let's do that in all aspects of the work that we do. And so something like today is about how we hold ourselves accountable. And so even though we have a grant that does this work, when the grant ends, do we stop doing the work? We cannot. So we need to continuously look for outside money if that's an issue. But again, as your college president, it is something that I am dedicated to doing. I stand before you as, I'm not a diversity hire, but I create diversity just by being here as a female and then as a Black woman. So a different view. And I see this room is very diverse. Our campus should look like this because our community looks like this. So again, I want to thank you all for just a few minutes of your time today. I'm going to stay as long as I can because I want to hear the results myself, and I want to see what happens on the panel. So I'm glad to be here at the opening, but look for me to be here throughout. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson. So I guess we can go ahead and move to the next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our project. So we have a Title V grant that we received in 2020. It's a 5-year grant, and SENDAS has been working across the campus with a bunch of activities. And it's a way for us to finance some of our commitments that we have across campus, especially when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and our guided pathways for success. Next slide, please. So SENDAS is going into, we just started our 3rd year. We're not going into it anymore. So we're in our 3rd year, and everybody that's working, we all have some end goals, and these are performance measures. So it is our work that we're doing is actually increasing student persistence, course completion, graduation, and transfer rates. And we do this by 3 different goals. We are enhancing and integrating student supports. We are providing professional development across campus. And our 3rd goal, is which we're here for today, is looking at creating a more inclusive hiring practice. Next slide, please. So as you can see, our 3rd goal is actually to recruit and hire an equity-minded and diverse college workforce that's reflective of our students and our community demographic. Next slide. So we can't do this alone. It is a heavy lift. With the financial backing of the grant, we were able to actually get an external candidate that is our consultant, and they are working with us to actually see where we need to make improvements. What are we currently doing that's hindering us from moving forward with our inclusive hiring processes? So we actually have 2 phases of this work that's taking place right now. Phase 1 started in November of last year, where we had a kickoff meeting where a few of us got together and actually met with the consultant. They requested a whole bunch of documents that we were to provide that had to do with the hiring processes here on campus. They then also recruited and had conversations and interviews with human resources staff, not only here at the campus, but at the district level also. In February, everybody probably remembers I sent out a lot of requests for people to be part of focus groups. And we did get a huge response back, and we did have focus groups that the consultant actually met with everybody and had conversations and asked questions and gathered information from there also. Then after those groups were facilitated, they went back to work, went through all of the documents and paperwork and interviews and information that they had gathered, and they created some recommendations for us. Now, these recommendations we received in probably like late July, around that time. We had conversations as the group that was together, that was working with the consultant, and we went through and we created some outlines for y'all, which had the actual recommendations and then the work that's already taking place on campus towards those recommendations. So this is the work that was already taking place while all these conversations and stuff were happening with the consultant and the staff and hiring managers and search committee members that were on campus. So we can move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So on everybody's table that you're here in person with us, we have some little booklets that you can help follow along, because we didn't go into writing every single one on the PowerPoint slides. There's a lot of information there. And if you're with us virtually, Laura's going to drop in a link for you to actually follow along also. So the consultant tried to categorize as much of the information into 4 different areas, and then an extra area that was just like additional recommendations. So we're going to start off with our hiring processes. This really has to do with how the posting process happens for our jobs. So some of the recommendations were to expand where we post jobs, to convey the commitment to our diverse workforce through targeted language that's on our actual job descriptions and the postings that go out, inform staff and faculty about those job postings, and then look at the technology that we're using to see if there's any barriers that might be hindering access to a diverse workforce that's looking to apply at Mesa Community College. Also, inform the hiring managers of candidates, their demographic, so we can make sure that there is sufficient representation on the actual group that's moving forward for the screening process. Now, some of the clarifications and progress that's already taking place is that the postings are actually distributed externally to a whole bunch of different entities and areas. Their recommended sites that they wanted us to add, that's already in the process of taking place. Now, everybody has to remember that we usually have like between 50 and 100 postings going on at one time. There's a lot going on. And then if we want this stuff posted on external websites, like, what do we have? LinkedIn, monster.com, those are the ones that are coming to mind. But every single one of those sites actually requires you to fill out a form, and everybody wants it a certain way, and there's a different information that you need to provide. Well, Human Resources is actually looking at software to where they can do bulk postings. It's one area where they can go in, put in the information that they need, and then it actually sends it out to all of those different entities. So then that cuts down some of the work process that happens. We currently do have a DEI statement on our job postings, but there is always room for improvement, and we can look at, making updates if it is needed. And recently, many of y'all have noticed that the job postings are actually being posted on the intranet for us on a monthly basis. So we're aware of all the opportunities for professional growth that's taking place on our campus. Next slide. So now we go into the actual screening process of our applicants. They recommended that we incorporate ways to measure years of experience for minimum requirements, provide flexibility in recognizing leadership and supervisory skills, recognize transferable skills in the relationship to the position, and doctorates should not be overly biased desired qualifications. Well, not that they shouldn't be, but at times it does seem to skew some of the ratings that happen when we're looking at those desired qualifications. So some clarifications, minimum qualifications in our policies and our standard operating procedures. It does states that there are related information, so it allows us for some flexibility in those areas. We do count volunteers in internship work towards meeting the minimum qualifications. And the district and HR have resources that help them be consistent with the definitions of leadership and supervisory skills. Next slide. So the interview process. We only got one recommendation for here. I know. So allow for probing questions during the interview, especially related to the diversity, equity, and inclusion to assess cultural competence. So we actually do allow everybody during the process to have probing questions. And I think that was kind of a myth that was going around the campus that we weren't allowed to do that. But always have a conversation with HR to make sure that you are doing it properly and you're meeting the right question format and things like that for them. I will defer that to them. Don't work in HR. Next slide, please. Yes, ma'am. Let me bring you the mic because they can't hear you. Oh, go ahead.
I really can. Going back to the interview question. So when we are conducting interviews, it is appropriate if someone makes a statement answering the question, and then you say, can I follow up on that? You know, you don't want to go outside the parameters of the interview and ask something like, say, for instance, you know something about this person. You don't want to stay outside the parameters, but you do want to be clear, am I correct? And saying that it is important to say, ask a follow-up, right? One thing I hate is when you find out like some, you know, because you can talk to people generally and they say, oh, you didn't answer a couple of questions, right? What I don't understand is when you have time, why don't people say, can I ask you this again, right? Rather than ding you and not give you the job because you didn't answer the question, right? Because I think that is a power play as well. Am I correct, since HR is in the room? Don't ding people because I'm telling you, I hear it all the time. I'm like, well, they still had 20, 15 minutes. Why didn't you ask them a follow-up question, right?
I agree. Sometimes you can gather all the information at that time. Yes. Right. It's a very stressful situation. Yes, exactly. Notes, more conversations around that. Thank you. So professional development, guidance and training on applying diversity, equity, and inclusion lens for hiring managers and search committee members. We do have staff that has DEI training. We should be leveraging their knowledge and using them. Training and guidance on differentiating race and ethnicity. Some of our materials that we have actually switches the word back and forth. So there's not actually a clear definition. I see a lot of heads nodding there, yes. And focus on the systems that disenfranchise the racial and ethnic minority candidates, not the people themselves, just like what Dr. Robinson was talking about. Asking those follow-up questions. You have time, do things like that, the system. So we are working with the consulting firm to assist in some of the development of training resources during phase 2 of the grant, and Ms. Nicole will speak about that in a little while. Next slide, please. So some of the additional recommendations. Recognize the diverse representatives when we ask them to participate on search committees. It seems like we pick the same people over and over again, and it becomes habitual. So just recognizing that they are part of the committee, they do have a voice, they have knowledge, we have to recognize that. Consider drawing diverse representatives from a larger pool. create internal forums or space to communicate and discuss DEI and hiring processes updates like we're doing today and we will continue to do in the future. Modify hiring processes to be more efficient to avoid losing candidates. Consistent and equitable onboarding and support mechanisms. Use mentors and community connections to help become engaged members of the college community. And identify and correct inequities in professional development to increase retention and help staff feel valued. So right now, HR is exploring alternatives to recognize diverse representatives on search committees. The DEI Council publishes regular updates and provides opportunities for employment feedback and questions. There has been a modification between the first and the last interview to limit some of the time from posting to actual hire. And professional development is offered for all employees through the Center for Teaching and Learning. Next slide. So phase 2 of the work, Ms. Nicole Collins, who is our Executive Director for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, is going to come up and talk about what's going to happen in phase 2.
Hello, everybody. Good to see everybody. So I'm going to try to put this back in order in my head. So the first thing we're going to be looking at is what's going to happen in October, which is now. Receiving sample of interview questions. I actually have those in my hand. So we just got a draft from our consultants about sample DEI questions. So the reason why this came up is because there seems to be confusion about the difference between equality and equity. And there are challenges for folks in terms of what to look for in a DEI question, right? I've said in lots of interviews, in the DEI question, it trips everybody up. It does, because it's how do you answer it? What is the right answer to say? And then we also don't want candidates to feel afraid to say the wrong thing, right? So we really want to see, is this a part of your culture? Is this a part of what you understand? Can you demonstrate this within MCC, given the fact that it's our value and it's our first strategic direction? So these recommendations have come out. It's just a draft right now. So we're going to go through it and take a look at some of the information that they provided. But we just received this the other day. So the work is going forward. So excited to hear. And also they're going to give you some suggestions about responses, what to look for in the responses, because we know that no one is fully a DEI expert, because we're always learning, we're always growing. We may be DEI representatives, we may be DEI leads, but we also have to be humble in knowing that we're not going to know all the things all the time. So we need to be able to participate in learning experiences like this. Okay, next is the virtual skills development. So part of the work that we wanted to do was not only just to train hiring managers, because that's one part of the puzzle, but we also want to do capacity building with HR to say, how do we as a school empower our hiring managers to do this work? We only have the consultants for a certain period of time. We only have the funding to do this for a certain period of time. But as we develop a cadence of accountability, we want accountability on both sides, not just for the hiring managers where the onus is fully placed on them to carry out the DEI work, but also for HR to have the skills in order to help implement it, to help sustain it, and to create a system of accountability there. So those trainings should be happening next month. So I believe it's about 8 hours or so. So they're going to be going through the skills development there. And that way it helps to support them and they help to support our college. Next, we're going to begin implementing the DEI question. So once that stuff is going forward, that information has to go and be vetted through some additional channels to make sure that we're not messing things up legally or things like that. We want to make sure we cover all of our bases. And then last but not least, we have culturally responsive training. And I definitely want to give kudos to Jen Strickland and her team who really helped to develop this. There's a company called Vector Solutions. They work across multiple industries and they provide training. The reason why we decided to go with this vendor is because they specialize in higher education, not just for faculty and staff, but also for students. Some of their training that they have for us is, my print is so small, I can't read it. How to become an ally, how to do bias training, and HR will be helping you to get into that space. What we wanted to do was create an equitable access point. And so Canvas was selected as the learning management system to implement this. So we can keep track of who is taking the training. So you could even use it. You can use it with your teams. I don't suggest that folks wait until hiring season comes around to do this work, because then there's a sense of urgency. Let's get it done, let's get it done, let's hurry to get people hired. Let's not do that. Let's put this into the culture of the college where we're consistently training. So if that means that you got to dedicate some of your team meeting to this, let's dedicate some of the team meeting to this so this is not a shock. And let's get it done because this is a box we need to check. And we're good at checking boxes, but we got to do some hard work. Okay? And this work is hard work. We have to be honest. We have to be honest about ourselves, honest about where our biases show up. Even though we say we may not have them, they're there. They're there. We need to be able to check each other and say, hey, listen, let's be careful about this, but also understand some of the power dynamics that exist in the hiring committees that makes it hard for certain folks to speak up when things aren't going well. So we want to create the culture. We want to create the cadence of accountability. So that's it.
Thank you, Nicole. So we're actually at the end of our presentation, and now it's question answer time. And we do have a microphone up front, so if you can make your way to the microphone so then the whole world can hear you. And we do have, for everybody that's virtually, if you can click on the bit.ly or the QR code, the Fs that are capitalized are actually small. They're supposed to be lowercase f's. And it should get you to a place where you can ask your questions, and the team will do the best to answer them today. And Marcy is going to be letting us know what those questions are if you have any virtually. So we're going to go back and forth. Yes, it's actually in the booklet for everybody here. And it's going to be on the slides that will be passed out to everybody in an intranet post, because we will continue to take questions even after this event. So if the panel wants to come up and have a seat so everybody can see y'all and y'all can answer your questions, I'll hand over the mic. So today we have Donna, who is an HR supervisor, and Garrett, who's the HR director, and then Miss Nicole, who we've already introduced.
So I'm going to try to be concise in my question, but I apologize in advance if it's a bit long-listed. So we know as an institution, we're focusing on student retention and student success. And much of the literature and the research points to, especially within the HSI literature and other literature surrounding colleges and universities that have a large number of students of color, that much of their success is also inclusive of being in the classroom with faculty that look like them as well. And so diversity within our faculty as well as our staff becomes an important conversation. At MCC, when we look at our faculty diversity, we are incredibly low when it comes to students of color. Most recent data that I received is we have 14 residential African-American faculty, 22 residential Hispanic faculty, 9 Asian residential Hispanic faculty, 3 residential American Indian faculty. We're an HSI serving institution with just over 6,500 students. We have 22 Hispanic residential, 36 adjunct. So as we look at our hiring practices, I'm curious, how can we start to leverage the good work that you're doing to cross over to adjunct as well as our temporary, which seem to have the most loose hiring practices behind them? If you look at our existing policy, there's a difference in how we hire. I'll talk for student affairs, temporary employees, technically, versus full-time. We don't have to have a hiring committee. There's no desired and minimum qualifications necessarily. We have a range, temp 1, temp 2, temp 3. I can hire who I want. Doesn't necessarily mean I'm accountable to DEI in that process. Adjunct faculty, I believe, are the same. I'm not saying that we don't do that in some areas. We have some colleges that, or excuse me, departments that do a phenomenal job of that. But how do we carry this into an area where we seem to have the most opportunities, and particularly with instruction, adjunct as well as residential, but then also on the temporary employee side as well, because those are the folks that are in front of our students. Thank you.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There's directed procedures and processes for full-time hires, and there isn't necessarily for part-time hires, at least procedures and direction that come down from, our district partners. However, that does not mean that we as an institution can't go ahead and implement those for all our employee types. And we have seen those types of changes recently in the last few years with certain segments of our population here. I'll give you an example. When we're talking about part-time staff, or Kathleen's talking about mostly part-time staff because it's the student affairs area. Recently, we had a change to where even when we're hiring our OYO or OSO faculty, previous to this change, that was also, there was no direction that said you had to have a hiring committee and you had to have certain things. We have changes now here at MCC where if we're going to hire OYO or OSO faculty, that there is going to be a competitive search. It's not just going to be, hey, I know Bob in this particular department and he's an adjunct and I know he's really good and I'm going to hire him as my OSO or my OYO. So we have the ability to make those changes as an institution. We don't have to ask permission to do extensive searches for a particular type of employee. And I think that's one of the easier ways, one of the quickest ways that we can go ahead and make sure that we continue this work throughout all of our different employee types and all of our classifications and jobs that we have out there. So we can make sure that if we have a department that has 2 full-time employees and maybe 6 or 7 part-time employees, that we are using these efforts for the whole group instead of just one segment that we anticipate is going to be here longer than the other segment. And I'll tell you, there's departments where we've had part-time staff and adjunct faculty within the academic departments that have been here for years and years and years and years. So just because they're part-time or quote unquote a temporary employee type doesn't mean they're only going to be here temporarily. They may be here for much longer than many of our full-time.
Marcy, do we have any questions from the virtual? Celia?
Follow-up question to that. Point number 1 under screening of prospective applicants. I highlighted or circled incorporating creative ways to measure years of experience to meet minimum position requirements. What kind of creative wiggle room could this bring so that it would help us be more equitable in recruiting and growing our internal staff who are trying to transition from part-time to full-time?
So as far as measuring years of experience, it's how long have they been doing a particular type of work that's related to the type of work that you're trying to hire for or trying to prepare them for. A lot of the times we have issues that frustrate everybody involved, including the human resources professionals that are helping committees through hiring, is when we get application materials and a particular candidate that looks extremely strong, shows that they've had 10 years of experience doing a particular type of work that is valuable to the position that we're trying to hire. And we get all the way through the process just to find out that, yeah, they were at that particular job for 10 years and they were working about 10 hours a week doing it. So when we have to do, the calculations as far as what's the equivalent to a full-time person, then it comes in at they were doing that work for 9 months. And the job demands that it has 2 years of experience. So that can be really frustrating, especially when we don't find that out till the very end. We have been trying to take steps to try to catch those things early so we can try to contact those applicants to get the clarification on it before we get all the way through a process and we have to tell a hiring manager, sorry, you can't hire that person because they're not qualified. As far as the, related skills is something Melissa pointed out. Again, if we have a classification that has minimum qualifications for a certain job or a certain skills or certain types of experience, it doesn't have to be word for word exactly how it is in a classification. And I'll give you an example. If we're hiring, and I'll use my department because I'm most familiar with my department, of course. If I'm hiring someone to be an HR supervisor over recruitment and staffing, which I am, if you're interested, they have to have some experience. There's going to be a certain number of years of experience in education that's related to that to meet minimum qualifications. Well, number one, we have equivalency statements in our job postings. And what that means is, if the job posting calls for a bachelor's and 4 years of experience, but the applicant only has an associate's degree, or the applicant only has a high school diploma, they can still qualify by substituting years of experience for that education that they don't have. So that helps expand it a little bit. If it calls for a certain number of years of experience in area of assignment, that can be defined as, I can go as specific as I'm looking for someone who has experience as a recruiter in human resources. I can broaden it a bit and say I'm looking for someone who has experience in human resources. I can broaden it again and again and again if I need to. We just need to make sure that at the very beginning of our search process that we're defining what those parameters are in our search plans. Because what we can't do is say things like, I'm looking for a candidate that has a degree in this field, and this field. So 3 particular fields. And then we get to screening. I have nobody that has degrees in those 3 specific fields. Well, by the letter of the law, I can't interview any of them. But now if I say I want this field and this field and this field or something related, now we've broadened it a little bit and I can expand my pool. Or we have some hiring managers that just say, hey, the classification calls for a bachelor's degree. I just want somebody with a bachelor's degree and this type of experience. Now we've expanded it even more. So there's many different things that we can do to help broaden that pool and get the greatest reach we can get. The most important thing we can do, though, is make sure we're defining that ahead of time. And that's where it really comes down to the hiring manager. And even there's many times where the hiring manager will consult with the entire hiring committee when they're putting these things together and find out, hey, what's the best way that we can get the furthest reach and expand our pool so we can try to get not only somebody in the seat that I'm recruiting for that's going to be successful in the job, but that's going to be successful in helping incorporate all of these type of things to the campus at large.
Thank you. I think that was helpful. I don't know, at least for me personally, it was well understood that we could potentially expand that verbiage because I've always interpreted this as the district minimum requirements. So to even change verbiage to say or related experience is something that may not be known to all hiring managers. If I can do that, that could change a lot. But secondary to that is the recommendation of the consultant was to identify the relevance and level of responsibility within past positions may be of more value than counting time. So that is kind of what I'm trying to figure out, and what kind of leverage will we have as an institution potentially to nudge that as well?
And I appreciate you bringing that up because the truth is, due to systemic inequities, everybody doesn't have a chance to get the time, right? There's some people in part-time roles doing full-time work. And because the job itself deems it part-time, they don't see the 40 hours that they're putting in behind the scenes. And so I think we've got to acknowledge that that in and itself is limiting, but also the district has to give us a little bit more leeway. And we've got to be able to define what does related experience mean to the candidate, right? It's different when the hiring manager knows versus we know it as a candidate. What is an area of assignment? What does that mean? That's an ambiguous statement to a candidate. So we want to make sure that we can define, and that's just one of my personal suggestions, that it gives us the ability to say to the candidate, hey, listen, you can take a look at what this means to Maricopa, and then you can make an assessment. But counting the years of experience is going to put us out of step with how our generation of workers are changing, who are in the work of gig economy right now. They're working at one job part-time, and then they're working at another one, and then they're doing Uber Eats, and then they're doing Lyft. All of this requires that you do accounting, that you have best practices, good customer service. So we have to be able to have a conversation, even with our district offices. How do we account for the experience of a new generation? Because staying at a job for tons of years is not a thing anymore. There's tons of literature, tons of research that supports this. So we can work with our district to advocate. So we're not necessarily counting the years. We're defining the growing experience of a changing demographic. And those are the bodies that we want in this seat. And those are the bodies that we want being students here.
Thank you.
Marcy's going to go, and then we have a virtual.
We have a virtual question. Sorry, I had to shift. So we are training hiring managers, but what steps are we taking to train HR directly? Recognizing we have some large disparities beginning in HR with practices of not meeting the diversity, equity, and inclusion challenge.
Okay. So a part of the phase 2 with our district, with our grant is to address that very thing, right? So if the training is just for hiring managers who are not hired to be HR professionals, so let's just acknowledge that. We can't expect folks to know all the things, but to have our HR department be DEI representatives, model DEI values, understanding things from an equity and an inclusivity lens, capacity building, so they feel more empowered to have hard conversations. These conversations are hard, but how do we empower them with industry leaders? And so these are HR professionals. I'm not an HR professional. I am a DEI professional, but I cannot speak from the DEI, from the HR landscape. These individuals are HR professionals who will be coming in and doing the training for the month of November. But my hope is that the training doesn't stop there. It is consistent training throughout the team. And I'm quite sure Garrett and Donna would agree that this is something that we have to be continuously developing, because these are our values as a college. And this is a cadence of accountability once again. So when we have documents like this that show that we've got works in progress, things are happening, this is an opportunity to hold our college accountable. And hopefully this is something we do, not just within HR, but in different departments. How are we holding each other accountable to our values and holding each other accountable for our strategic directions?
2 questions from the floor.
I have a good question related to related experience. So sometimes that becomes really vague and challenging. So for instance, in my department, tutoring, I've been told before, like, related experience has to be someone who's worked in a tutoring center. But when I'm hiring, say, a supervisor level position, I want someone who has had some lead work experience or supervisor experience and who's worked with students. So an advisor could make a great supervisor in my department, but that's been really limiting. So I wonder if there's a plan to adjust that, or how can we allow some of our departments on campus to broaden what they can bring in and give current employees the opportunity to advance?
So again, that's something that we want to make sure that we talk about and define at the beginning of a search. You know, it's like Nicole just mentioned a minute ago, talking about what area of assignment means. We need to make sure that we define that up front. Especially in the student services areas, you know, there's so many things that student services do, and many different things that, you know, staff that are assigned to academic affairs do that would all relate together in one form or another. So yeah, I agree with you that, you know, especially if you're looking for a supervisor in a tutoring center, you know, and that would be a classification that wouldn't necessarily require someone to have been a supervisor before, but they have experience in serving students. They have experience in, you know, let's say, for example, you're hiring a supervisor in the math area. They've got experience with mathematics and helping students in one form or fashion. Again, you can broaden that scope, and you don't have to narrow it. We don't have to be so narrow when we're looking to fill a position like that, or fill a position that's remotely like that across the campus. But again, it's just important to define that at the beginning. Make sure that your hiring committee members that are going to be doing the screening and interviewing are all on the same page as far as, hey, this is what would make a great candidate. This is what we're looking for. This is what we believe will be a quality addition to our department as well as the college as a whole. So, you know, the more, I think when we did a lot of the changes to our classifications from a global perspective a few years ago, we hadn't really had a lot of experience with the classifications that we got as far as defining the minimum qualifications for us up front. Because if you remember, if you were here before 2018, we had 1,800-ish different job types and job titles / classifications. We had some classifications across the district where there was one person with that job title, and it was more than one that had something like that. So we went something from like 1,800 down to the 250, 260 something that we have now. But that is still a lot. Also in that, before those changes, none of our jobs had defined minimum qualifications. So one of the things that our office would always ask hiring managers when we were trying to develop a search plan to hire somebody is, what do you want to have for the minimum qualifications for your position? So that gave us a little bit more room, but it also, at the same time, it could be inequitable, because you could have a student services specialist at one college have defined minimum qualifications, and another college have completely different minimum qualifications. So I may qualify for a job at Gateway, I might not qualify for a job at Mesa, even though it's the exact same job. So when we got the classifications down in 2018, it kind of took something away that we had some say in, but it also helped make it so that we were a little bit more consistent district-wide. So, but yeah, you know, that's the long way of saying, again, like I've said before, let's make sure that we have a good conversation, the hiring manager and the hiring committee with HR, as far as defining exactly what you're looking for, what skills will make them successful, you know, not only, again, for your department, but for the college as a whole.
Okay. Go ahead.
Brookson. I'm actually representative of I'm part of the district senate as well as our campus group and a minority group that's here at our campus. And a document has been generated where multiple questions were put in. So I've been tasked to be the moderator for those questions. Now there's like 10 questions. So for the sake of time, I would like to ask a couple of them and see if there's anybody on the virtual that has a question. If there's not, I will continue with the questions that's been added to this spreadsheet. Does that make sense?
Yes, and
Okay, so I'll do the first two and then we can kick it back over because I just want to make sure I respect everybody's time. Plus this document will be shared with you, Nicole, so those follow-up questions can be possibly answered after the fact if they're not answered today.
perfect, thank you.
Okay. So the first question, I just want to kind of start off with segueing from what was talked about a little bit earlier in regards to the minimums. And it's just a basic question. The minimum requirements for part-time staff and the hours, is there anybody that's looking at revisiting what the minimums are for our temporary staff? Because, and I'm gonna give an example. I've had, for myself, personally, a loss of about 4 different employees who went to other exterior jobs because they've worked for me since 2018 because they didn't have a number of hours, even though they are well qualified to do the work to apply for a full-time role. Two went to the Mesa Public School District, 2 went to ASU and got jobs as full-time employees, but because we said, oh, you are short 600 hours because they were part-time, we lost quality candidates who could be internal candidates that know our processes, who know the back-end work and knows our technology. And it goes into a segue of if it is more expensive to hire new candidates versus retaining our employees here, why aren't we looking at that as a practice?
So I just want to repeat to clarify, you're talking about our current temporary staff hours and how that equates to meeting MINS for a full-time position.
Correct.
Okay, just wanted to
And
clarify
to
that.
see if they're any place visiting, and then if not, why is that occurring?
So the district has been continually exploring different options and considerations based on the feedback from Senate and others. There's a few different district-wide committees that are looking at it. At this time, we are still required to meet the MINS as they are stated with the hours as the 2080 hours to equate a year. We do know in the student affairs area, they just amended some of the qualifications for the 109 and the 111 to allow for more flexibility. So even though they're sticking with the years for most cases and the hours to equate those years, they were allowed the skill set to be a little more broad to get those positions. And I don't have the data from those committees, but my assumption is as we continually move on and get more feedback from folks from the last comp and class implementation to the future comp and class implementation, that will continue to grow, and I'll take the feedback from these groups to expand our options.
Okay. And how do we get that information when those findings are occurring and we get updated as hiring managers and people are looking to fill these roles, that the amendments are being addressed, or if this conversation is happening?
I'll let Garrett address it as well, because he's probably going to get more information being on the district councils. But honestly, you sometimes might get it before like somebody like myself would, because of your experience with the exempt Senate and their experience sitting directly on that. So we all have our different groups that feed out the information from the district groups. So, honestly, sometimes I hear it from an outside source, and then I contact my colleagues to verify information. So anything we can do to collaborate. If you hear of a change, you let me know. It works better when we all have the teamwork together to, work on whatever is being changed. But
Yeah, I'm a part of the, we call it the Human Resources Executive Leadership Council. It's basically all of the HR directors and above across the district that get together as a group and we talk about things like this. So when there are changes like that, they usually are first communicated to us via that forum. If when we get the communications, they aren't followed up with, and we're going to be sending out a communication or a series of communications about this to everybody, more than one of us will make sure that we state that needs to happen, because everybody needs to know when there's significant changes to anything to related to full-time classifications. Additionally, the district HR, specifically the classification and compensation department, has been engaged with what they call the Mercer team to help look at all of our classifications, to help redefine parts of our classifications and make different levels of within our employment cycle, as far as whether we go from individual contributor to our professional levels, to our management levels, to our executive levels. When those come out, I'm anticipating we're going to get a lot more information on the Mercer stuff coming up this next year. There have been some town hall, I don't want to say town hall discussions. There's been some WebEx stuff that's come out from district HR about those over the last year, and I think there's going to be more next year. But we're definitely going to get a lot of that information coming down, and I anticipate changes to qualifications to a lot of those areas, or adjustments, I should say.
I mean, just to be more direct about how a hiring manager will receive it, if it's not something global that comes out, such as those that have been affected by the town halls, that should be my team communicating that with the hiring managers, or whomever will replace me communicating with the hiring managers. So I'll make sure to communicate that in my meetings, and make sure that the person who comes on board knows that that's, a priority for our staff.
Although this report out is focused on Mesa Community College and Mesa HR, will this data and information be shared with all HR departments in Maricopa, including district? As a follow-up, will there be advocacy and/or active inquiry for consistent and applicable changes with HR as a whole with this data to help showcase positive change, better practices, and stronger relationship across the board?
So yes and yes. The Executive Leadership Council that I just spoke about, I am going to be personally sharing the progress report and all the information related to this from the SENDAS grant with them, to let them know the good work that we are doing and continuing. I'm going to advocate for this work to be considered for all of my fellow directors at the other colleges. They should be taking stuff from this forward and trying to incorporate it in their own operations. I'm hoping that is going to generate a larger conversation within HR leadership of, hey, now that Mesa has done all this work and shared all this with you, and what are you doing? Or what are you going to commit to doing to make sure that we turn this into not just a Mesa thing, but a Maricopa thing? And that's going to help generate additional ideas and additional suggestions and additional adjustments to make sure that we, grow as a district versus just trying to grow as Mesa. But, Mesa leads the way in many, many, many things across the district, and this is going to be another example of something that Mesa is going to lead the way in. Marcy, I apologize. Can you repeat the second part of that question? Yes, so this report out that you're seeing today is just going to be the first of many different types of report outs. I don't know if we'll have to this scale, but I know just me personally as the leader for the HR department here at Mesa, we are planning on having something like this quarterly that anybody can attend from Mesa, where if you're familiar with something that the fiscal office has been doing for the last several quarters called the fiscal dish, we are going to have something similar. And it may be a report out on something specific or a topic of something specific, or it may just be, hey, Mesa, come to talk with HR and ask us what you need to ask us so we can try to get you the clarification or the answers that you need. And of course, at any time, if something is brought up that we haven't looked at yet, that's where we get our best information and our best suggestions is from the folks that are in this room and the folks that are online right now. It's you on the ground that are in the hiring committees all the time, that are on the ground doing this good work to try to bring this as to be incorporated as a whole with our college. I'm not on hiring committees unless I'm hiring someone in my office. Donna's not on a hiring committee unless she's hiring somebody for her team. We help guide and direct all the hiring managers that do this work much more often than we do. So y'all are going to see and have things that don't work as well as they should, or have suggestions to make things better. Bring those to us, and we want to help work with you on those and do the research on them. And again, try to make things better, because again, Mesa leads the way and you all lead the way for us.
Thank you. It's actually 12 o'clock.
Can I ask one more question?
One
It
question.
segues- And it segues off. So, like you said, you are the ones that kind of quarterback the efforts for hiring. You're not on other hiring committees. So the question that's been posted is, why are the qualifications of hiring an employee not dependent on the division/department expert? And we cannot expect our HR department to understand the nuances of every division or department. So why is that? You guys are the quarterbacks in regards to determining what the information is for hiring managers who are the subject matter experts.
I'm going to try to take a stab at that. It's a collaborative effort. That's what Garrett was specifying earlier, where we really need to be more emphatic during the search plan process. And it's my experience that a lot of people rush to turn that in because they want to see it posted. They have to get it posted right away. They want to get that person in the seat. But really, that's where we're failing collectively, because we need to have these greater conversations up front. And honestly, part of that is on me. During the pandemic and working electronically, we weren't having as many face-to-face conversations. We were doing a lot by email. We were going back and forth saying, yeah, looks good, let's move forward. And that's not the way it needs to be. We really need to have much more thorough conversations at that time. We need to make sure everybody is understanding what the rules are. We need to be more clear in our rubrics, how we're defining related experience, the related education, the area of assignment, all of the things that were referenced earlier. We want to make sure we're on the same page. And that is why the committees are expected to have, a subject matter expert. Usually it's somebody from that department or another college with a similar department. And then we want to have representation from outside sources and a lot of other areas. It's all to work on making a better plan. Sometimes the hiring manager will work on the whole search plan themselves and turn it in, and the committee members never even see it. They just show up for an interview and get a list of questions and respond. They don't necessarily know what the hiring manager is looking for, what is the skill set, what are the buzzwords that aren't necessarily in there. And that all needs to be something we can work on collaboratively, both from the starting point with HR on the search plan, but also with the hiring manager and their committee members. Like really just having better conversations about what are we looking to get out of this, and who are we looking to hire. And I think I took a bit of a tangent, but are we
No,
good?
you answered
Okay.
the question, but can you add, how would that work? I mean, because that initial conversation has to start from HR, obviously. So how are you guys going to work with the subject matter expert to make this come to fruition?
Other than a dialogue?
Is there something that you can put as a job aid to, this is something as part of a step of job aids of how we communicate at this level? How do we do this transaction at this level? Something that's more directed and guided so that the conversation is more deliberate.
Understood. So thank you for clarifying that. Honestly, we have a great HR manual out there, and I realize it's 30 pages long, but it has so much helpful information in there, including the how to ask a follow-up question. Which ones can you ask? What do you avoid? Or even if a candidate starts talking about their family, how you're supposed to kindly redirect them from disclosing certain facts about themselves. That is a resource that I put on every single template for every single search out there, and expect the hiring managers and the committee members to review. And it's part of that training that is taken that is required for anybody serving on a committee. So that is honestly just our starting point, and that is a district-wide resource. However, we have built some other trainings locally. We've just been providing them via PDF because we just have not necessarily had the time to have those one-on-one conversations, but we need to be more strategic about that. We need to get back in the habit of every single search plan having a meeting with those, at least the hiring manager, if not the whole committee, and then throughout the process, because there are some great resources out there for both the screening and interviewing that we've also shared with Nicole that includes additional things about confidentiality. You know, you're not supposed to speak about a search outside of your search committee. So when you're in meetings and you hear somebody talking about stuff, we're all accountable to, you know, like squelching those conversations and redirecting them. And implicit bias, that's a big part. We're all required to do that for faculty searches here. There's a series online. It's going to be transitioned to the Canvas course. But it's also within those HR presentations that hopefully we'll get back into the habit of spending that time. And that time also allows the committee members to have those questions addressed that maybe they don't want to address publicly, just on that smaller group scale. And hopefully that will help us continue the collective education of the hiring practices and maybe not have as many of the rumors that get out that people, you know, begin to assume are fact, because the more, you know, the more often you hear, the more you think they're true, but they may not actually be fact.
Thank you, everybody, especially Donna, Garrett, and Nicole for answering questions today. Laura, can you put on the next slide? We do have a QR code and a small a short URL for everybody. If you still have questions and want to continue the conversation, please add information there and we will do our best to get the information out to our team and have them answer the questions and get back to you. Next slide. There's one more slide. So if you want any information about what the SENDAS grant is doing across the campus and information, I think we have all of the information of the recommendations, and the actual full report is all on the employee resource page that we have for our SENDAS grant. And the little URL here will take you directly there, or if you're on the internet, just search SENDAS and it'll pop up.
So for the questions, the bit.ly that we had published was going to the wrong form. So if you have problems with that, maybe they can just email you directly, Melissa?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
melissa.meadows@mesacc.edu. And we will send a follow-up intranet post and provide all that information also. Thank you for joining us today. Bye.